Hi, this is Robert Clinky-Beard with the Commercial Landscaper Podcast. We're going to take 20 minutes to deliver some amazing content from accomplished leaders and business owners to provide you with some value to scale your business and to become a better leader and push yourself out of your comfort zone. We encourage you to like and share with everyone to spread our messages. I'm super excited to announce our new partnership with Weathermatic. For most landscape companies, irrigation is an untapped gold mine for growth and profit, but labor and process problems stand in the way. So Weathermatic has created a partnership to package mobile technology and software with proven business solutions to tackle the perennial irrigation challenges and take your operations to a whole new level. I encourage you to reach out to Weathermatic and learn more. Cheers, everyone. Hi, with the Commercial Landscaper Podcast. I'm really excited today to be joined by Megan Wright. Megan, welcome to the show today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here, especially during this time of year. For anyone who participates in the H2B program knows that this is kind of go time in terms of navigating the program results for spring, but we'll get into that a little bit later.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Cool. So tell, we have listeners all over the world and they probably love to know a little bit more about Megan. So tell us more about yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. So at Moss Labor specifically, I spend my time a little bit more on the front end of the process, if you will, really educating folks about the programs, the regulations, really the requirements of the visa programs to really ensure that they feel as comfortable and confident prior to moving into the space. And another big focus of what I do is trying to advocate on behalf of the program and, of course, the employers that participate really at the state and federal level. Again, there's a lot of education that needs to take place, again, to support these folks that are using these programs. But prior to Moss Labor, I actually was a government contractor at Department of Labor. Of course, one of the key government agencies that's really used in the visa application approval process. So I got to see behind the curtain, if you will.
That's huge.
And it is huge. Let me say, it all makes sense now. But before that, actually, what I love is actually started my career in the hospitality space and worked in management at a resort that really relies to this day holistically on the H2B program to keep their operations moving at a high level. So it's been really great now to almost come full circle, and again, to be able to educate and support those employers now who look to the H2 programs to run their business. So It's been fun. I've kind of been able to be sort of at each really different points in this program, whether it's using it directly, kind of seeing it at the government approval process level, and then now, of course, being on this end to really try and support the employers that are using it at this stage.
Cool, awesome. Well, that's a great background. Let's dive into it. I know a little bit about H2B. We didn't really use it at my original company back in Arizona. We actually, unfortunately, had a little bit of a bad experience with a company we tried to use there. But we luckily being in a border state, we didn't have too much of an issue with labor. But
right.
I know certainly in the last couple of years, there definitely was some challenges. Are we going to get workers? Are they going to approve a certain amount? I haven't heard it as much recently in terms of people having challenges. So I'd love to just hear, where are we at in terms of numbers and the whole program itself?
Sure, it's a really good point, and I think overarchingly, if we want to take a step back, so of course the H2B program is a non-immigrant seasonal worker visa program that of course goes through a very strict approval process, but at the surface level, and I think for anybody who participates again in the program, the elephant in the room, if you will, is that the H2B program, which again is for all non-agricultural seasonal operations, is that it's a capped program, meaning that there are a finite number of these H2B visas made available every year. That magic number is 66,000, and it's split into two halves of the fiscal year, meaning that if you are an employer with a start date of October 1st through March 31st, you would pull from the first half of 33,000 or if you have a start date of April 1st through September 30th, you would pull from the second half. They reallocate then the next 33,000 visas. That's just not enough. Demand is through the roof. And so what you are referring to is each year, really, we need permanent cap relief. I guess I should start there, but that needs to come from an act of Congress, which even though this is a non-immigrant program, it still gets put under where the regulations are written. It's still part of a larger immigration code. So we know that that's a hot button, regardless, sort of either side of the aisle. And so at this point, what we see actually is what's called cap relief. And so through the budgetary appropriations process, Congress with Homeland Security really agree on an additional allotment of visas to make available each year. And so what we've actually seen in recent years is that not only are these agencies allocating the maximum number of additional H2B visas, about 64,000 and change additional, is that they're making those extra visas available a lot sooner. So not only do we kind of know what we're working with, but then it allows us to be able to try and plan ahead and really put together some mitigation strategies depending on your overall luck in the filing process. And so, yes, it's been very, very helpful recently, again, just to know what you're working with. Still not enough in terms of everybody getting exactly what they want and what they need. There is some potential light at the end of the tunnel. There is some legislation that might be introduced on the Senate side. Really upcoming. It's still trying to garner its last pieces of support. It's called SEPA, Seasonal Employer Protections Act. But to answer your question, yes, it's gotten a little bit better. But what I mentioned at the beginning with this being an interesting time, it's important to note actually that the landscaping industry, of course, really corners the market, if you will, in terms of the usage of the H2B visas in general. And so when you think again about those two halves of the fiscal year and when would you want to apply, I don't care really where you are in the country, an April 1st start date makes a lot more sense than an October or a winter in terms of the landscaping industry. And so where folks get potentially a bad taste in their mouth with the H2B program is if everybody is requesting the same start date, if everybody and their brother's going after an April 1st, there has to be a fair way for Department of Labor to process all of those applications. And so enter in the infamous lottery. And the lottery, of course, it's completely randomized, but a process, essentially an assigning process where every employer who submits their application, they get, again, assigned a lottery group. And then that group letter, in turn, then is the order in which you get put through the process. You clearly want to have a higher or a better lottery placement because that's what's going to get you to basically USCIS, Citizen and Immigration Services, that is the gatekeeper of the visas. So it does become a bit of a mess there, but I know it took us a long way around the barn. But yes, it's getting better, but we still have a long way to go in terms of the overall availability of these visas for employers.
Okay, cool. Great information. I mean, do you have a rough idea of the number of people who apply versus the number of, visas granted?
Yes, it does, of course, change each year. So again, when we think about kind of overarchingly, we've got, even for the April 1st allotment, we're talking over 100,000 H2B visa positions requested. And again, we know that we're working with that 33,000 initial allotment. So it's just not enough in any sense. And the program keeps growing too. And so when you program, I should say, the demand for the program keeps growing. What we've really seen trend-wise this year is that, yes, landscapers do still corner the market, but we've seen so many more non-traditional employers, if you will, start to enter the space, which just clearly underlines the fact that this visa class isn't going anywhere, and more folks are trying to turn to it for a labor solution.
Like what other type of companies are
Sure.
coming
So
into that space?
So I think at surface level, again, since it is a seasonal / temporary visa class, you as an employer have to be able to prove that your operation as a whole then is seasonal and
Mm,
or temporary. And so what we see a lot of times is what the industry calls peak load. So yes, maybe, again, let's take a landscaper. Maybe you have operations all year round. Maybe you also do snow removal along with all of your maintenance. But you certainly have that peak need of labor where your labor levels go far and above. And so that's what the industry calls peak load. And so really at this point, as long as an operation could prove that on paper, sort of quantifiably, they in theory would be eligible. I mean, this year we had a tortilla chip manufacturer. We have actually a lot of massage parlors, really anything where you could try and prove that overarching seasonality. Folks are trying to get their foot in the door.
right.
Which obviously in turn from a filing process makes things interesting because Department of Labor analysts, get a little confused. There might be a little pushback. But yeah, we're really seeing a lot of people turn to this as a potential solution.
All right, cool, very cool. In terms of, when you see people being rejected, what were some of the biggest reasons? Is it, down to paperwork or the typical reasons that people get applications rejected?
Yeah, again, it's so there's a few things that H2B employers have to keep in mind. So number one, I would say the biggest pushback is just making sure that you can create what's called your temporary need statement, sort of proactively getting in front of Department of Labor saying, look, I need this many people during this time because, and that because is becoming more and more important, providing that burden of proof again on paper to support that need, because again you're submitting this to someone who's never run a landscaping operation before. They need to be able to objectively see those levels on paper before they'd be able to pass you forward. So I would say seasonality is still a big thing. And from that perspective too, as I mentioned, bona fide need, we have to be able to pair why you're asking for the number of workers that you are to what you're looking for. So it's becoming harder. Let's say it's your first year of business and you're having, your job boards aren't producing any applicants for you. That's going to be hard when you think about Department of Labor is going to have really nothing to look at to say, okay, well, why are you requesting 10 people or why are you requesting 15? So for first-time program users, a little bit tricky there. And then, of course, we also have to be able to prove that we're not adversely affecting any similarly employed U.S. workers. So it is a bit of a puzzle to put together, which again is why education on this program is so important, so that
Right.
you do put
Yeah.
your best foot forward.
Yeah, for sure. We're obviously coming into an interesting year with elections and not necessarily, getting into politics at all, but, how does that then potentially affect the program? I mean, different laws or changes still get made, or is it just pretty much status quo until, the dust settles?
It's a really, really good question. I think, again, in order to fully change the program, that does require an act of Congress, whichever direction you're thinking there, you would, of course, need a majority. There is something that we are going through right now. There are actually H2 program specific, and again, I keep mentioning that. So H2B, of course, for landscapers, and then H2A for all things agricultural. It's sort of the sister visa class, if you will. There are two notices of proposed rulemaking out there right now. One from Department of Labor that holistically is affecting the H2A program, but then we also have one from Homeland Security that would affect both the H2A and H2B programs. And again, thinking about this current administration, yes, that NPRM is a little bit more, let's say, there are some additional union protections, there are some additional worker advocacy protections. And so you can kind of feel that mirror the current administration a little bit more. So again, yes, I would say that while the total program needs, of course, consensus of Congress, we can still see these individual agencies that are, of course, controlled in terms of appointees and the overall secretaries mirror that of the administration a little bit more closely. So yes, I would say that an upcoming election could still have an overall effect on how these programs continue to evolve.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
And then switching hats, based on your past experience and, behind the scenes and just seeing it from a different perspective, what are some of the things that you see in terms of either successful applications or, people getting the best chance to get an allocation of labor? What are some of the things that you could share from that you saw firsthand?
Yep, I think timing is also really important. We've talked about seasonal need, we've talked about being able to prove on paper, but it's also important to keep in mind that the H2B program, again, at surface level, takes about 150 days of application process. And so I think that it's really important, even right now, we see folks that are still coming to us at Moss Labor who are hoping for a spring start date, not realizing, at this point, while we're talking, it's the middle of January. And, this for sure, surely is enough time to get the ball rolling. And so I think that's really important, is allowing yourself enough time to, again, number one, make sure that you understand all the program requirements, but then also give yourself enough time to get physically through the overarching approval process. And so some of those pieces, parts two, really that first chunk of time is what's called the prevailing wage determination. And so in this program, you do have to pay a specific wage. That's actually a combination of your job duties coupled with where the work is taking place physically in terms of counties. So again, as a business owner or as someone who might be going through this process, actually taking the time to think, okay, well, where is my client base? Where am I going to be performing this work? What geographic area does that cover? So again, there's a lot of moving pieces that you would want to keep in mind. So I think the timing is one, but then even going through that paperwork process, there's a lot of implications. So I think it's, again, why it's just always so important to have someone in your corner who really understands the program and all of the moving pieces to ultimately be able to help you create the most compelling argument moving forward.
Right. Yeah, for sure. You touched on the wages part. I think with people perhaps not understanding the program, they think, oh yeah, I can apply for 20 plus laborers. Talk me through the wages part, because obviously there's a certain wage level that the new employees would have to be paid. But then also there's the effect or potential effect of your existing employees as well. Just educate, some of the people on the call about that.
Absolutely. So we've talked about, yes, the prevailing wage is in most cases what you would be paying, which again is very specific to your area. So when we go through that prevailing wage determination, we're actually looking at your specific job duties, again, coupled with the counties in which the work is taking place. So a lot of times you really need to be very thoughtful in what you do want to pull into the job description. Maybe you are a general sort of maintenance and installation landscaping company, but then you want to start doing hardscapes and you put in some masonry into your job description. Well, masonry might very well take you into a completely different wage category. So there is a lot of thoughtfulness that needs to go into the job description as a whole, keeping in mind since it does have such a correlation to the wage. But then you make such a good point. The program calls that corresponding employment. And so ultimately, Department of Labor, of course, wants to ensure that we're not adversely affecting any of our current domestic workforce. And so where we see that play out, again, in terms of wages, is that if you do have anyone similarly employed, and on the H2B side, it's about, let's call it 80% or more of the same job duties. So someone holistically doing the same occupation, they too need to be paid at least that prevailing wage in order to stay in compliance. So yes, maybe you want to bring in some high school students over the summer, and that falls within your contract period of the H2B program. Well, again, if they're holistically going to be doing that same job, you better be ready to pay those high school workers, that same wage. And so, yes, definitely
Right.
something to keep in mind. Something that a lot of folks potentially forget is if you happen to be in an area where there is a union presence, you do also have to make sure that you are participating in a collective bargaining agreement as well. But that's taking us, off maybe a little bit too far into the weeds. But yes, corresponding employment's very important to keep in mind when you're thinking about this program. Again, just your existing workforce. There are a few exclusions to that, but for the most part, that's something very important to keep in mind.
Okay, cool. Anything else you could think of that there just could be, things that maybe people are not quite aware of, but, maybe once they get through the application process or maybe even get the workers, then there's like, oh, that light bulb turns on that there's something they weren't quite aware of, especially if they don't necessarily use an agency to
Yeah,
help.
I would say for sure we always talk about, disclosure is key. There's a lot that goes into the ultimate paperwork that you might not think is a part of the approval process. But let's say, once workers arrive, you want to provide them with a vehicle to use, or maybe you want to help them secure housing. Well, those are both amazing things that the program doesn't even require you to do, but we actually have to disclose that on the paperwork. So you can't just change your mind or say, oh, I'd love to offer this to these folks once they get here. So I think, again, really trying to think as holistically as possible in terms of what are these folks going to be doing when they get here? What are some of these pieces that I might be willing to offer them in terms of benefits? Do I need to actually disclose that on the front end? I would say from a payroll perspective, payroll actually mirrors that of a normal domestic employee. So there's anything from too much from an HR or payroll perspective that you need to really think of on the front end. But there are minimum hours guarantees. There are ways to be very thoughtful, again, about how you fill that out on the paperwork to make sure that you're not holding yourself maybe to an unrealistic expectation into how much work you might have available to them, depending on how long your season is. Or maybe it's the opposite. Maybe you certainly don't want to lowball how much work you think these folks might do, just in case you were to ever have what the program calls a paper payroll audit. Again, any federal visa class, there's always the possibility of having a fun audit. So again, why that disclosure and document retention is just so important as a whole.
Right. Okay, cool. The, new company comes in, loves what you're saying. They bring in, 30, H2B workers into the program, have a great year. They've now got all the labor they need to execute on the work that they've secured. The guys or girls go back to wherever, and then think, oh, I want to do this next year. And, they've spent all that time training, bringing the employees into their great culture. How do they then, is there a way in which they could secure those same workers again next year?
It's a really, really good question. I would say certainly the goal of the H2 programs, and H2B included, is that you really are creating your foundational crew. You are bringing back the same folks year over year. It does cut down on that training cost. You're excited to see these folks come back. I mean, we've worked with some employers for over 20 years, and they're on to their third generation of the same family. So that really is certainly the goal of the program. The asterisk or the fine print there, of course, is the fact that it's still capped and there are those finite number of visas. And so there are ways, again, to be creative in terms of when we think about those cap relief visas, those additional visas that are put forth with the appropriations process. There are, I don't want to call them prerequisites, but the visas themselves actually have requirements in order to gain access to them. So the largest chunk of those extra visas actually are held for what's called a returning worker. So someone who has held an H2B visa within the past 3 fiscal years. So in theory, by bringing the same folks back, it sort of opens up an additional pathway to sort of mitigate and fight back against the cap. And then there are a couple of mitigation strategies in terms of when you're filing and potentially even trying to find what we call cap exemption if you'd be willing to file starting in October. Again, getting a little bit into the weeds, but yes, really the goal of the program is absolutely to bring the same folks back year over year. And then yes, there are, I would say, some levers that you can pull because you are in fact bringing the same folks back. So still not a perfect science, still a lot of work to be done in terms of the program overall. But yes, again, there are some additional avenues if you are in fact bringing, returning workers back.
Okay, awesome. And then, just to wrap things up here, tell us a little bit about your company, how people could potentially get in touch with you, find out more, find out about the application process.
Yes,
Please.
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So at Moss Labor, we really are the nation's largest H2 services provider. And so that really gives us such an amazing opportunity to, again, be able to support our employers because we really have a finger on the pulse, if you will, of what's happening since we help support folks in a greater number of industries and geographies. We can sort of feel any effects before they happen. And so I would also just say that we've got such an amazing team at Moss Labor. Each one of our clients is actually paired with a dedicated team led by what we call as a case manager. And these folks just truly embody our mission, which of course is saving American businesses. It's just such an amazing group to be a part of. But I would absolutely say mosslabor.com. And then me particularly, I would love for folks to reach out. I'd be very happy to answer any questions. I'm sure we can provide contact details, but just mwright@mosslabor.com is my email, and I'd be so happy to have a conversation with anyone. Again, whether you're a veteran program user and trying to think of some of those new strategies, or of course, first time coming in and really wanting to make sure that this is a good fit for your operation.
Awesome. Megan, been a pleasure having you on the show today and providing some great education for either, existing employers or, maybe some people that are interested in getting into the H2B program. So really appreciate all your help today.
Absolutely. Again, thank you so much for having me.
No problem. And listeners, and look out for our new 360 plus community membership program coming down the pipeline. Look on our website and look out for some of our social media posts. But we've got a great new program coming down the pipeline. So anyway, thanks for listening today. Thanks again, Megan, for joining me. And we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.
Hopefully that was pure dead brilliant to you and you got some great takeaways for your business or your leadership role. This is Robert Clinkenbeard and I'd love to get you and your friends to join us on a future journey. So please subscribe to the various podcast channels or visit the commerciallandscaper.com or wilson360.com. Big thank you again to our partner Weathermatic, and I really encourage you to reach out to them and see about irrigation solutions or partnership with them. Hopefully have a pure dead brilliant day. Cheers everyone.